There is a name the FBI will not say out loud. There is a face they will not show you. And there is a Bitcoin wallet that went silent at exactly the wrong moment. And nobody is explaining why. Brian Entin knows. And for over 100 days, now he has been the one journalist who refused to look away. Most people watched the story from a distance. They saw the headlines. They shared the posts. They said a prayer. But Brian Entin did something different. He went to Tucson, Arizona. He knocked on doors. He called sources the FBI didn't want him calling. He sat across from criminal profilers who have spent their entire careers studying the minds of the most dangerous people on Earth. And piece by piece he has been building a picture of who did this. Today that picture got a whole lot clearer, because here is what just changed. The FBI is now confirmed to be actively using a behavioral suspect profile in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. A behavioral profile. And Brian Entin is the only journalist who has been allowed close enough to reveal what that means. And more importantly, what it tells us about who they are looking at. Stay with me. Because this is where things get serious. For those of you just joining the story, I want to give you just enough background to understand why today's update is so significant. Not the full story, not the beginning, just the part you need to know right now. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner with her oldest daughter, Annie. She was dropped off at her own home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona around 9:45 at night. That was the last confirmed moment anyone who loved her saw her alive. The next morning she was gone. Her phone was still there. Her wallet was still there. Her daily medication, the medication an 84-year-old woman cannot miss, was still sitting on the counter untouched. And on her front porch there was blood. Not a smear, not a drop. Blood. Evidence of a struggle. Evidence that Nancy Guthrie did not leave her home willingly. Evidence that something violent happened in the dark outside that front door before anyone in the neighborhood even woke up. And on that doorbell camera, a masked figure, armed, carrying a backpack, standing at Nancy's door in the early hours of the morning and deliberately tampering with the camera itself. This was not a random act. This was planned. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. That is the foundation. Now let's talk about what is happening right now, because right now is where the story gets deeply unsettling. 100 days. Think about that number for a moment. 100 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home. 100 days since that masked man stood at her door. 100 days of silence from the people who took her. 100 days of a family waiting by the phone. 100 days of an 84-year-old woman who needed her medication every single day, out there somewhere. Or not. And in all of that time, the Pima County Sheriff's Department has not named a single suspect. Not publicly, not officially, no name, no arrest, no answers. But here's what Brian Entin just confirmed. And this is the part that should make every one of you sit up straight. The FBI is not just investigating this case anymore. They are profiling it, behaviorally profiling it. That is a significant and deliberate escalation. The Behavioral Analysis Unit of the FBI, the same unit that gave the world criminal profiling as we know it, has developed a suspect profile for whoever took Nancy Guthrie. And the FBI is actively using that profile right now to narrow down who they are looking at. So let me ask you the question that is sitting in the back of all of our minds right now. If they have a profile, a real behavioral profile built from forensic evidence, from crime scene analysis, from decades of studying how people like this operate, why haven't they released it to the public? That question matters. Because the answer tells us something important. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell said it plainly. She went on Brian Entin's show, and she looked directly into the camera, and she said the FBI needs to release this profile. She said, and I want you to hear these words, the FBI needs to put out a profile like they've done for hundreds and hundreds of other cases. They have information about this offender that they could very carefully put into a profile to help people focus on that. Why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they doing that? Agent O'Connell went further. She said the FBI already knows things about the suspect that the public has never been told. She said they know how many sets of fingerprints were found inside that house. They know things about the physical evidence recovered from the scene. Things they have chosen not to share. And she believes, a former FBI agent believes, that the Bureau could release a carefully crafted suspect profile without giving away what they know. without compromising the investigation. So why the silence? There are really only two possibilities. The first is that releasing the profile could tip off the suspect and allow them to change their behavior or flee, which would mean law enforcement believes this person may still be in contact with the outside world, still watching, still aware of how close investigators are getting. The second possibility is darker, much darker. What if they are not releasing the profile because they are already close? What if the silence is not about protecting the investigation, but about not spooking a target who is already in their crosshairs? Think about what that means. Think about what that could mean for Nancy. Now I need to talk about the Bitcoin. Because if you thought the rest of this was complicated, hold on. In the days immediately following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, ransom notes began arriving at newsrooms across Arizona. Not one note, multiple notes, sent to KWLD News, sent to KGUN, sent to TMZ, each one demanding payment in cryptocurrency. In Bitcoin, one of those notes demanded $6 million. Another demanded 1 Bitcoin, which at the time was worth roughly $70,000. The notes included specific Bitcoin wallet addresses, real, traceable cryptocurrency addresses that investigators could monitor. And then on February 10th, 10 days after Nancy vanished, something happened that sent shockwaves through this investigation. Activity was detected in one of those Bitcoin wallets. At approximately 5 p.m. Arizona time, a transaction was made to the Bitcoin address listed in one of the ransom notes. Arizona's family television station confirmed it. The amount was not disclosed, but the transaction happened, and then another message came. This one said, "We are ready to talk." The other side never responded. Let that sink in for a moment. The people who took Nancy Guthrie reached out through a cryptocurrency wallet and said they were ready to talk. And the response from the other side, from whoever was supposed to receive that message, was silence. Nothing. Dead air. Now here's the question that keeps investigators up at night. Who was supposed to receive that message? The family? Law enforcement? A third party nobody has talked about publicly? And why, when the kidnappers finally reached out, did nobody respond? This is where things get truly strange. Former FBI agent and blockchain forensics expert Brian Entin, Raviv, told the New York Post that the payment into that Bitcoin account could be a critical lead. Because cryptocurrency, for all its claims of anonymity, leaves a trail. Every transaction is recorded on the blockchain. Every wallet has a history. With the right tools and the right expertise, those transactions can be traced. Not easily, not quickly, but they can be traced. So the FBI had something incredibly rare in a kidnapping case. They had a financial trail, a digital breadcrumb left behind by people who either didn't know it could be traced, or who knew and didn't care. And that is another chilling possibility that nobody is saying out loud. What if the Bitcoin was never really about the ransom? What if the wallet activity, the messages, the transaction, the demand for payment, was never a genuine attempt to collect money? What if it was something else entirely? Brian Entin's reporting and his conversations with sources close to the investigation have raised this exact question. Because here is what the FBI determined, and this is now confirmed. None of the ransom notes that were sent to media outlets were considered legitimate. Not a single one. The FBI looked at those notes, the $6 million demand, the 1 Bitcoin demand, the threatening language, the deadlines that came and went, and determined that none of them were authentic communications from the actual kidnappers. So if the notes are fake, who sent them? And if the notes are fake, what was the real purpose of taking Nancy Guthrie? Stay with me, because this is the part Brian Entin has been trying to explain for weeks now. And it is starting to come into focus. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jim Clemente, a man who spent his career in the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit visiting prisons and interviewing the most dangerous criminals in America, sat down with Brian Entin and broke down exactly how the FBI thinks about cases like this. Clemente described how agents would approach convicted serial killers and rapists and child abductors years after sentencing. They would build their egos. They would make these men feel important, make them feel like they were being studied and learned from, because that was the only way to get inside their minds, to understand how they think before the next crime happened. That methodology, that accumulated knowledge from decades of interviews with the worst of the worst, that is what is now being applied to the Nancy Guthrie case. And when that kind of expertise is applied to a crime scene, what comes back? is not just a description of a suspect. It is a map, a psychological map of how someone thinks, of what they wanted, of what they were afraid of what mistakes they likely made. And the experts who sat down with Brian Entin on that CW special, the one that aired May 6th, they laid out a profile that is specific enough to make your skin crawl. Dr. Casey Jordan is a criminologist and behavioral analyst with decades of experience. She told Brian Entin directly, this suspect is probably around 27 or 28 years old. Young. Local. He definitely lives in the area. Or he did. She said, and I want you to hear this carefully. She believes this person was either eliminated by a puppet master or he fled. She mentioned the proximity to the Mexican border and suggested that if he ran, that is the direction he would go. And then she said something that has been echoing in my mind since I first heard it. She said this is a guy who on the day the story broke quit his job, left town, broke up with his girlfriend, and changed his behavior completely. Think about what that tells us. If Dr. Jordan is right, and she has built her career on being right about things like this, then there is someone out there right now who completely reorganized their life on February 1st, 2026. Someone who saw the news. Someone who recognized what they had gotten involved in. Someone who panicked and ran. And somewhere in that profile, in that behavioral map the FBI is building, there are digital footprints. There are financial records. There are phone records. There are surveillance cameras that caught someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is a thread, and the FBI is pulling it. But here is where I want to push back on something. Because I think it is important to be honest with you about the tensions in this investigation. Because they are real and they are serious. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nano stood up recently and told the public that law enforcement is getting closer. That they are making progress. That the case is moving forward. Brian Entin heard that. And Brian Entin, a man who has been boots on the ground for the story since day one, respectfully and directly disagreed. His sources are telling him a different story. The forensic evidence in this case has largely stalled. Very few significant discoveries have pushed things forward in recent weeks. Entin put it this way, and he was careful to leave room for hope. It can literally change in a second. DNA evidence, a hot tip could come in. And that is true. This case could break wide open tomorrow. It genuinely could. But right now the gap between what the sheriff is saying publicly and what reporters on the ground are hearing from their sources is significant. And that gap matters. It matters for the family. It matters for the public who is still looking for Nancy. And it matters for whoever took her because they are watching this too. Let me tell you about the hair. This is something that has not gotten nearly enough attention. And Brian Entin confirmed it directly. A rootless hair was recovered from the crime scene and sent to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia for testing. Quantico, the most sophisticated forensic laboratory in the country. Now here is why this matters, and why it is complicated at the same time. A rootless hair, a hair without the follicle attached, is significantly harder to extract DNA from than a hair with the root intact. The root contains the most usable genetic material. Without it, the chances of identifying someone drop considerably, but the chances do not drop to zero. The FBI lab in Quantico has capabilities that go well beyond a standard forensic lab. They can do things with trace evidence that would not be possible anywhere else. And if there is any extractable DNA on that hair, even the smallest trace, Quantico is the place that will find it. The fact that this hair was sent to Quantico rather than a local or state lab tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the FBI is treating this evidence. You do not send something to Quantico unless you believe it might be the most important thing you have. So right now there is a single hair in a laboratory in Virginia that might have the name of Nancy Guthrie's kidnapper written on it at a molecular level. And we are waiting. Now I need to talk about something that nobody in mainstream coverage has fully addressed. And it is the chaos at the very beginning of this investigation. Pima County Sheriff's Department Sergeant Aaron Cross, an insider who has been following this case since the first night, sat down with Brian Entin and described the opening days of this investigation as and I am quoting him directly, a show. He said investigations were disorganized. Witnesses were being unnecessarily re-interviewed because nobody was tracking who had already been spoken to. Critical information was not being shared between teams. And perhaps most damaging of all, the relationship between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI was complicated by ego. Sergeant Cross told Entin that ego was preventing the FBI from taking over full lead control of the investigation. He said, "The ego prevents the FBI from taking over lead." Let that land for a moment. In a case involving an 84-year-old missing woman whose daughter is one of the most recognizable faces on American television, in a case with Bitcoin ransoms and armed suspects and blood on the porch, the two primary law enforcement agencies were butting heads because of ego. How many days were lost in those first chaotic hours? How many leads went unpursued while agents and deputies were figuring out who was in charge? And in a kidnapping case, where every hour matters more than the one before it, what did that delay cost? Nobody has answered those questions. Not officially, not on the record. And maybe the most important question of all, if those early organizational failures cost critical investigative time, is the current momentum enough to overcome that lost ground? I want to bring in Dr. Gary Brucato now, because his analysis of a suspect profile is something that you need to hear. Dr. Brucato is a clinical and forensic psychologist who specializes in criminal behavioral patterns. He appeared on Brian Entin's News Nation special alongside Dr. Ian Burgess, the real-life criminologist whose work inspired the Netflix series Mindhunter. Dr. Brucato told Entin that this abduction shows signs of being financially motivated. The ransom notes, even the ones the FBI deemed inauthentic, suggest that at least some of the people involved were driven by money, not ideology, not personal vendetta in the traditional sense. Money. He also suggested that the suspect likely had prior inappropriate behavior on their record, not necessarily serious crimes, not necessarily things that would show up immediately in a background check, but a pattern, a history of small violations that pointed toward something larger. And then there is this. The experts discussed the possibility that Nancy Guthrie may have known, or at least trusted enough to answer the door for whoever came to her home that night. The blood on the porch suggests a struggle. But the fact that she was at the door at all in the early hours of the morning raises a question. Who did she think was knocking? Who did she trust enough to open that door for? If she knew this person, or if this person presented themselves in a way that seemed familiar or safe, then the investigation suddenly turns inward. Toward people in her circle, toward people who knew her routine, knew her address, knew which cameras to tamper with, knew she lived alone. This is not random. The experts are unanimous about that. This was not an opportunistic crime. This was planned, calculated, and executed by someone who had been watching. Now let me circle back to the Bitcoin, because there is a layer to this that I have not fully unwrapped yet, and I think it is the most important part. The FBI looked at those ransom notes and determined they were not legitimate. But here is the critical distinction that is getting lost in the coverage. Determining that a ransom note is not legitimate does not mean the kidnapping is not real. It does not mean someone is not holding Nancy Guthrie somewhere. It simply means that whoever sent those notes, the Bitcoin addresses, the demands, the deadlines, may not be the same person who actually took her. Think about that. Think about what it means if there were two separate actors here. One group that physically abducted Nancy Guthrie, and another person or group that saw an opportunity in the chaos and sent fake ransom notes to try to profit off someone else's crime. That would explain so much. It would explain why the FBI dismissed the notes. It would explain why the deadlines came and went without any apparent consequence. It would explain the strange activity in the Bitcoin wallet, because if the wallet was created by a copycat opportunist rather than the actual abductor, then the communication through that wallet would never reach whoever actually has Nancy. And it would mean that the family, Savannah, Annie Cameron, was receiving panic communications demanding money from people who had absolutely nothing to do with where their mother actually is. If that is true, and I want to be clear that this is a theory based on the evidence that has been reported, then the real kidnappers have been completely silent. No communication, no demands, no proof of life, complete silence. And that silence is the most terrifying part of this entire story. Let me ask you something directly. Why would someone take an 84-year-old woman and then say nothing? No demand, no communication, no proof of life. If money was the motive, and the experts believe it was, then silence defeats the purpose. You cannot collect a ransom if you never make a genuine demand. Unless the plan changed, unless something went wrong on that porch, something that was not supposed to happen, something that turned a kidnapping for ransom into something else entirely. The blood on Nancy Guthrie's porch has haunted this investigation from the beginning. How much blood? Where exactly it was found? Whether it was consistent with a struggle or something worse. These are details that law enforcement has carefully controlled. They have not told us everything. And maybe they are being careful because what they know, what the forensic evidence actually shows, is worse than what they have said publicly. Maybe the silence from the kidnappers is not strategic. Maybe it is because the situation changed in ways that nobody planned for and nobody is prepared to admit. Or maybe, and I want to hold on to this, maybe Nancy Guthrie is still alive somewhere. Maybe she is being held. Maybe the people who took her are scared and do not know how to walk this back. Maybe they are watching this coverage right now and trying to figure out their next move. That possibility, that she is still out there, is what keeps her family going. And it is what keeps Brian Entin going. And it is what keeps this community of people who have never met Nancy Guthrie but who care about her deeply, coming back to the story every single day. Here is something I think we need to sit with for a moment. The Pima County Board of Supervisors is reportedly pushing to remove Sheriff Chris Nanos from office. That is not a small development. That is a signal that at the highest levels of local government, there is a belief that this investigation has not been handled adequately. When elected officials start talking about removing the top law enforcement official in a county, in the middle of one of the highest profile missing person cases in the country, that is not politics. That is panic. That is a recognition that something has gone seriously wrong, and that accountability is coming whether anyone wants it or not. Brian Entin addressed this directly in his May 11th episode of Brian Entin Investigates, Day 100 of Nancy's disappearance. He pushed back on the sheriff's claim that investigators are getting closer. He noted the tension between public statements and what sources are actually saying. He refused to let the official narrative go unchallenged. That is what good journalism looks like. Not accepting the comfortable answer, not moving on to the next story, staying, pushing, asking the questions that make officials uncomfortable because those are the only questions that matter. So where does that leave us? What do we actually know right now, today, on day 100 and something since Nancy Guthrie disappeared? We know the FBI has a behavioral profile of the suspect. We know they are using it actively. We know they have not released it to the public, and that decision is deliberate. We know that a rootless hair recovered from the scene is sitting in the FBI lab in Quantico right now waiting for analysis that could potentially identify a suspect at the genetic level. We know that the Bitcoin ransom notes were dismissed as inauthentic, but that cryptocurrency activity in one of those wallets created a transaction record that forensic blockchain experts say could be traceable. We know that the opening days of this investigation were described by an insider as organizationally chaotic, and that ego-driven friction between the sheriff's department and the FBI may have cost critical early momentum. We know that the leading criminal profilers in the country believe the suspect is young, probably in his late 20s, definitely local, and may have already fled, possibly across the border. And we know that one of America's most respected journalists refuses to accept that this case is moving forward until the evidence says it is. What we do not know, what nobody knows publicly right now, is whether Nancy Guthrie is alive. What we do not know is who that masked man on the porch camera actually is. What we do not know is who sent those Bitcoin ransom notes, and whether they have any actual connection to where Nancy is. What we do not know is what the FBI's behavioral profile says, who it describes, how close they really are. The investigation is ongoing. The answers have not come yet, but they are out there, somewhere in a Quantico laboratory, somewhere in a blockchain transaction record, somewhere in the memory of someone who saw something in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood at 2 in the morning on February 1st and has not yet come forward. I think about Savannah Guthrie a lot when I report on this story, because most of us, if we are being honest, process this as a news story. We follow the updates, we share the videos, we discuss the theories, and then we go back to our lives. But Savannah Guthrie cannot go back to her life. Every morning, she sits behind that desk on the Today Show and does her job with a professionalism and a grace that is honestly hard to fathom given what she's carrying. And every night, she goes home not knowing where her mother is, not knowing if her mother is warm, if she is scared, if she is in pain, if she is still here at all. The family offered a $1 million reward for information, leading to Nancy's safe return. $1 million. For anyone with a piece of information, any piece, that brings her home. If you are watching this video and you know something, anything, please make the call. The FBI tip line is active. The reward is real. And somewhere out there a family is waiting. Now I want to say something directly about the Bitcoin angle, because I know a lot of you are fascinated by it, and I think it deserves a more careful look than most coverage has given it. Cryptocurrency was chosen for these ransom demands for a reason. The people behind those notes believed, or hoped, that Bitcoin would protect their identity, that the blockchain would hide them, that the money would move without leaving a trail back to a real person. They were wrong about that. Partially wrong. Bitcoin transactions are public, every single one. They are recorded on an immutable public ledger that anyone in the world can view. What Bitcoin does is separate the transaction from an identity. You can see that money moved from wallet A to wallet B, but you cannot immediately see who owns those wallets. But here is what the people who sent those notes may not have fully understood. There are companies, entire firms built around exactly this problem, that specialize in tracing cryptocurrency through the blockchain and de-anonymizing wallet owners. Companies like the Lionsgate Network, whose CEO spoke to the New York Post about this case specifically. Companies that work directly with federal law enforcement. The FBI has access to these tools. They have been using blockchain forensic analysis for years. And if those wallets were ever connected, even once, to a real-world financial institution or a crypto exchange that requires identity verification, the trail does not go cold. It narrows, sometimes dramatically. So the person who created those Bitcoin wallet addresses and sent those ransom notes to newsrooms across Arizona may have believed they were invisible. They were not. They were leaving fingerprints, digital fingerprints. And those fingerprints are being examined right now by people whose entire career is built around reading them. There is one more thing I want to bring up before we wrap this chapter of the story. And it is the theory that will not go away no matter how many times people try to dismiss it. The theory that the masked man who stood on Nancy Guthrie's porch, the one whose face we have never clearly seen, the one who tampered with the doorbell camera, may already be dead. Brian Entin raised this on his News Nation special. Criminal profiler Dr. Casey Jordan raised it. Multiple experts raised it. And the logic behind it is chilling. If this abduction was organized, and all the evidence suggests it was, then there was a hierarchy. Someone above the man on the porch. Someone with the planning ability to organize this operation. Someone who knew enough about Nancy Guthrie's home and her schedule and her security setup to send an operative to her door in the middle of the night with a backpack. In organized criminal operations, the person at the bottom, the one who physically carries out the crime, is also the person who carries the most risk of identification. They are the weakest link. They are the one who can be caught and who can talk. In serious criminal organizations, when a low-level operative becomes a liability, the solution is sometimes permanent. Dr. Jordan put it bluntly. She said the man on the porch was either eliminated by a puppet master or he fled. And if he was eliminated, if the person the FBI most desperately needs to find and interrogate is already gone, then an already difficult investigation becomes exponentially harder. Because you cannot interview a dead man. You cannot offer him a deal. You cannot put pressure on him until he breaks and gives you the name above him. If the first link in the chain is gone, the chain is broken. And somewhere above that chain, if this theory is correct, is a person who planned all of this, who has been watching the investigation unfold, who is smart enough and cold enough to have eliminated their own accomplice rather than risk exposure. That is the person the FBI's behavioral profile is aimed at. That is the person the blockchain forensics are trying to reach. That is the person that Hare and Quantico might finally identify. 100 days of silence. 100 days of a family waiting. 100 days of a journalist refusing to give up. 100 days of an 84-year-old woman somewhere unknown. This case is not over. Not even close. The FBI's profile exists. The DNA evidence is being processed. The Bitcoin trail is being followed. The witness pool is still out there. The $1 million reward is still unclaimed. Somewhere in the gaps between what we know and what we do not know, there is a person who has the answer to all of this. Maybe several people. And Brian Entin is going to keep looking until those answers come. I need you to do something for me right now. If this video has given you something to think about, if you have followed this case and you care about Nancy Guthrie and you want these answers to come, share this video. Not because the algorithm needs it, because somewhere out there is a person who has a piece of this puzzle and has not yet decided to come forward. And the more people who see this story, the higher the chances that person makes the call that breaks everything open. Drop your theory in the comments. What do you think happened? Do you think the masked man is still out there? Do you think the Bitcoin notes were a distraction? Do you think law enforcement is closer than Brian Entin believes? Or do you think the gap between the official story and the truth is even wider than we know? I read every comment. The conversation in this community has genuinely added perspective to how I report on this case. Your instincts matter. Your questions matter. If you are new here, subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because when this case breaks, and it will break, we are going to be here the moment it happens. And you do not want to miss that. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 100 days. Her daughter is still waiting. Her family is still hoping. The FBI is still working. And we are still watching. Stay tuned.